Welcome to the Dean's Roundtable podcast series with Bridget Johnson. Each month, we bring you game-changing conversations about K-12 education and leadership. Join us as top educators, field experts, and administrators share actionable strategies to transform your school community. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Dean's Roundtable podcast. I'm Bridget Johnson, the founder of the Dean's Roundtable, a space created for student life professionals to connect, learn, share, and grow together. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Lee and Will from Soundcheck Prevention Network, a nonprofit organization dedicated to developing student-centered programming to prevent substance misuse in schools. What makes Soundcheck's approach powerful is that it's inspired by students themselves, young people who want to be healthy, support their peers, learn unbiased facts about substances, and participate in their school's prevention initiatives. Will has taught substance abuse prevention to thousands of young people across more than 20 states and internationally throughout Asia, Europe, and Latin America. A Trinity College graduate, he uses his personal story of addiction and 17 years of recovery to create meaningful conversations with school communities. Lee brings both professional expertise and personal experience to her work. With a Master of Social Work and background in psychology and art, she worked as a youth and family therapist in foster care and schools before entering prevention in 2016. Like Will, she draws upon her own journey through substance use disorder and recovery to develop interventions that honor individual and community strengths. Today, we'll explore Soundcheck's origins, school substance policies, current drug use trends among students, and their approach to creating healthier school environments. I'm so happy to welcome Lee and Will.
Thanks,
How are you
Bridget.
guys doing today?
Yeah.
Doing well. We're
Great.
coming off the road and getting ready to get back on the road.
All right, I love it. I love it. So let's just talk a little bit about the Soundcheck Prevention story. How did it get started?
Yeah. Thanks, Bridget. We Lee and I met doing substance misuse prevention programming at a nonprofit about 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, I made the decision to pursue a master's degree, and kind of in that time period, felt really passionate still about prevention, and figured I would launch Soundcheck. And so I started this about 5 years ago, and pretty quickly and early on, and even during the formation of Soundcheck, I kept calling Lee or emailing her and saying, "What do you think about this idea? What do you think about that idea?" And I would say that what inspired Soundcheck, or really where we came from, is how can we build upon the idea of classroom education, which is really how we came up in prevention. Like, let's go connect with the kids. We're in recovery from substance use disorder, and let's sort of share facts, break down myths and things like that, and use our story to kind of make the information more salient to kids. But I think one of the things that we recognized was this was not really a systemic approach, and it was missing out on opportunities to embed a prevention mindset in a culture. It also was missing an opportunity to, what's even more important today, but we could tell back then as well, is to link this or kind of yoke it to the whole idea of just mental health and well-being. And so
Sure.
That is what we felt really passionate about. So I also could tell with Lee from getting to know her on the road, we were traveling all around the world doing prevention, but that she was just the kind of partner that could help sort of bring this idea to fruition, because we overlapped with a lot of our creative ideas, but we each had our own sort of mastery of the different things we've done in life, whether that was art or music, or certainly doing prevention, and Lee with a background in clinical social work. So it felt like a really good team to work together. And so I think, in closing, at least that part of the intro, and Lee, I'm curious of how you see our coming together to build Soundcheck out. But the method that we felt would be most sustainable and really get at the root of a school's culture was to talk to the kids first. And if we would interview them and design some focus groups that elicited their perspective on the culture, climate, to be able to identify the risk and protective factors in their community, then we'd have a much better way of helping schools understand what policies are working, what is not working, where are the kids really struggling and where are they thriving, and what can the school do to continue to support them or mitigate some of those risk factors. So I would say sort of the centerpiece of that we've come out of with our methodology is called soundboards. And that is a qualitative assessment that we do with school communities that now starts with kids, but now includes student life board members, heads of school, faculty, coaches, parents, all of that. And so we glean a lot of really cool information from people via qualitative assessment. And that can serve as the springboard or foundation for a school integrating this into their goals, into their strategic plan, into their wellness plan.
Awesome. So, Lee, anything you want to add?
I think that was a really good description. I was also at a place where I was looking at other opportunities and positions. I was thinking about going back to the school setting and being a school mental health counselor again. And then, this kind of arose, and I really did still feel passionate about this work and the conversations and ideas that Will and I had together. So it's been an exciting journey to help this grow, especially for me, I think, with really trying to wrap these conversations, wrap the topic of substance misuse prevention into mental health and overall well-being, because it is often siloed. And
Sure.
yeah, we want it to be something that just, it's okay to talk about these things.
Absolutely. And so both of you bring personal recovery journeys to your work. How does sharing these experiences shape your approach when working with young people in school communities?
Why don't you go, Lee, while you're hot here?
I am. Sure. It really helps to break down some barriers in terms of an adult coming in to talk to teens, and we're not just another adult from their perspective, like shaking their finger and saying, don't do this. It's really also humanizing the experiences that many of them can relate to, whether that's personally or with family members or friends. And so it really has opened the door to rich conversations and to be able to kind of sneak, or maybe not so much sneak, some education in there, but in a way that makes it feel real.
Yeah, I'll just tell a quick anecdote that essentially echoes that. I was doing a program here yesterday in Asheville, and it was for the whole sophomore class, fourth form class, and they did a little introduction ahead of time and mentioned my recovery. And the students at first, were sitting back like, oh, we just ate lunch, another drug talk or whatever. And, sometimes I think I've got 20 years or now 30 probably as a songwriter and a musician. And so sometimes I think that will give me the cool edge, but it doesn't. But as soon as she mentioned that his journey through substance use disorder and addiction, I saw about 80 heads just like snap to attention and look at me and be like, oh, okay. So just to that point, it does break down barriers and opens up I think it opens their ears and their minds to kind of reconsidering this from a perspective where it's less emotional, a little bit more intellectual.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have a lens that you see things through that others don't, and you can really speak to that. And I know that students definitely know authenticity when they see it. So I think that also probably helps. So, what are some of the most effective policies you've seen schools implement regarding drugs and alcohol on campus? And are there approaches that seem to work better than others?
Will, I see your gears turning. I would like to start. I mean, the thing that comes to mind first is clear distinction. So clarity and communication about what the policies are is so important, because there's often a lot of gray area or nuance, or students and adults have questions and aren't really sure. And then with that clear outlining, oftentimes if there is a disciplinary policy that, has to be in place, of course, if a kid is bringing substances onto school campus, for example,
Mm-hmm.
that goes down the discipline route. But then when that is balanced and clearly communicated, right, with a non-disciplinary, whether it's called a sanctuary policy or early intervention policy, where if a kid is really struggling, they feel like they can speak up to ask for help and they will get that support from adults without being judged, without going through the discipline system simply for asking for help. That tends to be pretty successful. At the same time, it can be really hard to create a culture where kids do feel comfortable speaking up, even when those policies are clearly defined.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one of the things I do want to spend a little bit of time on, I'm curious to hear your take is how many schools are kind of implementing or have those sanctuary policies? Are you seeing that more? Are you seeing that less? Are you feel like those are being effective? That was something that was really important to me when I was a dean. And the issue initially was that the students only heard about this when sanctuary went wrong, right? They weren't hearing all the times where the sanctuary policy was kind of affected or went off without a hitch. And so there was a lot of kind of distrust around, that's, you say there's a policy, but I know the dean's kind of waiting around the corner to say, gotcha, and then
Mm.
drag you through the discipline process, which was not what I wanted to do at all. I mean, the more that I could take things off of my plate, I was like, absolutely. If we can get students going through the health center versus the discipline process, I was all for it. But it really took some time before people would actually what they call trust the process. So I'm curious to hear from you all. Are you seeing sanctuary policies on campus, and do you feel like they're being effective?
I'll, I'll just say I'd be interested in what you think of this, Lee, but I would say that there are, we do have school partners that have some version of a sanctuary policy. And that seems to be an approach or a tool that schools started to adopt maybe even before I got into prevention 10 years
Hmm.
ago.
Oh yeah.
And some of them kind of have stayed with that sort of general idea, or what we appreciate about a school that keeps their kind of focus on prevention is, continue to evolve it throughout the years. And
Hmm.
maybe they've named it something differently. Maybe they've created a non-disciplinary team that students can go to about themselves to express concern, or potentially another community member. I would say, Lee, it's not really mainstream. Like, I don't think we see it in the majority of our schools.
Okay.
But it's not uncommon, and I do think it seems to situate pretty well in boarding schools. So I'll just leave it at
Sure.
that. I'd be interested in
Okay.
your take, Lee.
It seems to be something that is evolving, at least nationally, I would say. And I think,
Okay.
and I don't have numbers to back this up, but
Sure.
given some of the literature I've read and some of our anecdotal experiences, that there's a movement away from the very strict zero tolerance and more towards a balance of, if somebody truly is seeking help, we want to be able to support that. But I don't think that, I agree that we haven't come across that many schools in comparison that have really solid policies that they feel entirely comfortable with, if that makes any sense. Because I think a lot of schools are wrestling with, especially boarding schools or in different situations of, what's the best way to protect our kids, to
Right.
maintain the rules and to also support their well-being.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about, or you mentioned zero tolerance policies, and I'm curious to hear, kind of, in your experience, what are the benefits and drawbacks of this approach when it comes to prevention?
Um, Great question. I think benefits on the surface and maybe a deeper level too are, it's really clear,
Mm,
and it is a thing as a family when you send your child somewhere, or as a student who can really benefit, and I was one of those benefit? I went to boarding school. I went to Woodbury Forest School, and so it was really helpful for me to know exactly what was before me, and sort of the juxtaposition of the honor code and the single sanction policy worked really well for me.
Uh-huh.
And so I think the clarity there and consistency and fairness, if those two words apply, is really can be really helpful. On the other hand, I think we're at a time where really with all of these policies that we're talking about, it's always good. I was just speaking to a head of school about, how do you feel in 2025 about the single sanction policy versus maybe when you were at this school or I was at this school. And I think it's just always worth revisiting. Is it working? And can we still have a policy that's in the spirit of that makes it really clear what is allowed, what is expected, and what keeps our whole community safe in addition to individual students, but modify it to not be an immediate dismissal, but perhaps some other consequence that's not desirable, and that that gives incentive for
Yeah.
kids. So I think it's always worth looking for modification and evolution, but I don't have a firm stance. I think it goes in general. Is everything that you're doing a full package of, and
Okay.
is it all consistently communicated? So if you just have a single sanction, but you don't ever talk about substance use, or you don't have a strong and well recognized and clearly and consistently communicated non-disciplinary approach, then maybe a software update with your policies is due there. So that's
Okay.
kind of where I stand on it.
Gotcha. Any additional thoughts, Lee?
I don't think so. I mean, we know that harsh punitive measures alone typically do not work. But at the same time, as Will said, the single sanction or zero tolerance are very clear. So,
Yeah.
I do think that it is that constant update of what is effective, what is really serving the schools and the individual students' well-being, what is equitable, how are we supporting the whole community? And I don't have a really concrete answer for that because I've seen schools struggle with many different iterations
Sure.
and there isn't a clear, perfect answer yet.
Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't, right? Because I think if there was one, I think everyone would sign up for that one, right? It's a kind of a gray. It's murky. It's tricky, and you just kind of have to get in there and wrestle with it and figure out what works best for your community. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Um,
Bridget, I wonder with your experience, like if it resonates with you that, I think it's important for a school after they've done all of this work, which is really, it takes a lot of energy and time.
yes.
You've done a lot of work, you've dug in, you've been like, okay, first of all, it's okay if it's not perfect. Second of all, these things take time to get embedded into the culture. And during
Right.
that time, not everybody's going to be happy with it. And so those are just things that have kind of occurred to me lately is that as much as we want quick change to some maybe unhealthy cultural norms or vaping maybe has increased in our community, it does
Yeah.
take a little bit of time. And I think at a certain point, you just have to, we've done what we can and we need to move on to the next thing. So I think just to give deans and policymakers and schools a little bit of a break at a certain point, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, we've dug into this and now let's keep running the school.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a bit of a balance there because you can't just set it and forget it, right? You can't say this is our policy and mention it at the opening of school and then never revisit it again, right? Especially if you are at a position or a place in your school where you're trying to kind of change the culture around what's happening on your campus. That is hard to do, and it's like the Titanic. It shifts very slowly to go in the other direction. And so, what I tell schools now is like having these kind of pointed discussions or pointed conversations during times of particular high stress at schools, whether it's it start of the school year, absolutely, but the first dance of the school school year or homecoming or right before or after exams or right before a break where kids don't necessarily make the best decisions. Having just some public service announcement is not like you have to go in and do, a full day of training, but reminding kids this is what we stand for. These are our rules. This is why we do things here. This is how we want to keep you safe. Here are the consequences, and here are the options for you in terms of what's out there in your school community, and remind the kids of that on a regular basis. Sometimes they'll roll your eyes, but good, because then that means that they've heard it, and then they know you said it more times than not. And so that's what I encourage schools to do these days, because it's hard to kind of get your arms around it, right? And it's so much out there, and it's always changing, and it seems like the kids know, they're a couple of steps ahead. And so we've just got to make sure that we are continuing the conversation. And with that said, love to hear from you all, like the new trends in substance use among students, that parents, educators, and school administrators should be aware of right now.
You want to take that, Lee, or start us?
Sure. I will say, talk about a couple new things. I want to come back to one that's just kind of always around at some point. Right now, what we're seeing in terms of lack of awareness of a substance being around would be nicotine. And vaping or electronic cigarettes is kind of old news. It's still around. It's still a thing that's happening, but more adults are aware of it. More kids are aware of the detrimental effects of vaping. But new products like Zyn, which is a type of snus or snus, however you want to pronounce it, are not quite on adults' radars the way they are with students right now, it seems. And so that's a new product where, if anyone is unfamiliar, it's nicotine salts in a little pouch, usually with flavor and some other chemicals that you place in your mouth. And it's very small and discreet and therefore easy to hide. And so we've anecdotally heard more kids being aware of it among their friend groups, as well as possibly using it. They have started to add that to national surveys right now to track the amount of use. And it's something that the kids seem to not be as aware of the negative consequences, because the idea is, I'm not inhaling anything, it's not harming my lungs, therefore it's probably better for me. And so we've been doing a lot of education with students and adults around that. And some of the kids' eyes get a little wide when we talk about the risks of just nicotine itself in that potent form, as well as what it can do to their gums and teeth. And
Yeah.
I wonder possibly their digestive system, because unlike the tobacco versions where you're spitting out the saliva and brown liquid, with the Zyn or those versions typically swallowing it, all those chemicals.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Scary.
I think adding to that is, like, you've got sort of the influencer culture constantly sort of saying or touting that nicotine's a performance enhancing substance. And so that, combined with maybe it's less harmful if it's not actual like fiberglass chewable tobacco, but it's in a pouch and so on and so forth. So kids are getting that message, especially boys who are constantly trying to, we ask this and are careful with this sort of labeling it, but boys tend to identify with putting their tobacco in their mouth. So there's a bit of a masculine sort of association with it, and that on top of, and this would apply to all students, lifting weights or trying to perform better academically or athletically or otherwise. There are studies that show what nicotine does to the brain, which is increased concentration. And so
I
that
didn't
sort of
know that.
influencer culture merging with everybody looking for an edge and quote unquote safer edge is drawing people towards arguably one of the most addictive substances, nicotine in itself. And so just there's a little additional take on that, but nicotine in all of its forms is the tobacco industry is constantly looking for a way to get it in front of their future customers.
Well, it sounds like they're doing a fairly decent job with that at this point. My goodness, I had not heard about nicotine being performance enhancing. That's a new one for me. Huh. So something to think about there. Switch gears a little bit. So your work emphasizes student-centered programming. Can you explain what this means in practice and why you believe it's more effective than the traditional prevention approaches?
Will you take a stab at that, Lee, and I'll follow up since I
Hmm.
kicked us off on the bigger picture?
Yeah, of why the student-centered approach might be more effective.
Yep.
We, as adults, go into schools with lesson plans and outlines and topics and ideas of what to talk about. And I think as experts in the field who have traveled to so many different schools, we have a general sense of what might be relevant. But the kids are the experts on themselves and their communities and experiences. I don't know what it's like to be a teenager today. I didn't grow up with a cell phone with a camera and with social media, and getting into college was a different story when I was going through that process than it is now, just for a couple examples. And so, one reason that we wanted that student voice is to really understand what they are navigating right now to be able to better support them. And the other reason is because they have thoughts and ideas that are wonderful and are more invested in the topic, the conversations, their education in any subject when, when they have some inputs or feel that they have a voice in it. And we really
Hmm.
want to honor that. And I shouldn't be at this point, but I am constantly impressed by some of the insights that students have when we're interviewing them. Never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah. And you
I
and your
love that.
audience know that like kids love to be asked, what do
Hmm.
you
Yes.
think? And
Yeah.
I think around the topic of substance use, that can be a little trickier for school personnel or parents to kind of maybe they might not have the same reaction to the adults in their lives asking those
Hmm.
questions. They still
Sure.
appreciate it, and so I think. I mean, I remember one student, or actually, students typically say like, no one has really ever asked us like what we
Mm.
think, and I think so. We tend to serve as in the conversations we have with our soundboards with students, being in recovery and letting them know their voice is going to be heard. We sort of serve as a conduit to the planners and the thinkers and the student life and the people kind of running the school,
Hmm.
and but it's genuine. We don't just sort of say, hey, well, let them know what you all said. It's actually, it really brings everybody to the table. And
Nice.
so it is student centered, but ultimately, when a student says something, that tends to mobilize parents, tends to mobilize everybody else to say, okay, well, that's a little bit different coming from, a great quote we heard one time was a student in a resort town was like, we live in everybody else's vacation. How are we supposed to make healthy choices? It's really hard. And so, but that really stood out to the people that were making decisions. It's like, okay, so that type of qualitative feedback can have some real zingers to it. Like Lee said, we're constantly surprised and really touched by where they're willing to go, and that when you ask them, they're not piling on the
Right.
school with negativity. They're like, they want to join in that sort of problem solving um,
Hmm.
uh, thing that we're all kind of doing. And, they also have their typical gripes,
Of course.
which, it's fun to, they can lay into those
Absolutely.
if they need to.
Yep. And so, having worked with schools internationally, have you noticed cultural differences in how various communities approach substance prevention education? And is there things that, American schools can learn from other countries in that respect?
Hmm. Lee just got back from working with a couple of our partners overseas, and our background with our, we're a team of four, and three of us have been doing this in some form since the early 2000s and
Uh-huh.
traveled on 5 continents. So I think that international perspective is really helpful. Um, I think the conversation tends to be a little less fraught overseas sometimes, and that's a good and a bad thing. I mean, I think partially because the drinking age is lower. And so there is a little more familiarity with what comes up around alcohol. And we do know, by the way, from studies, and this typically is borne out in most of the data that you see, is that there is not a better way of drinking overseas than there is here. Youth that start at a younger age are at higher risk, and generally students where the drinking age is 18 are drinking at higher rates and having more negative consequences because of that. So it's not really a protective factor in and of itself,
Okay.
just to lower the drinking age. But I think some students overseas, depending on the city, depending on the country, might have a little more agency in their lives. A lot of kids are allowed to just take the bus home. And so there's a little bit of maturity that happens there that might not happen in the US, where sometimes it's like constantly being looked over and cared for, all with good intentions. So I think that enables, Lee. I think you probably would agree. You were probably just in a classroom with 30 countries represented in one classroom. So you have that sort of level of people who have lived in a bunch of different cultures. Young people have lived in a bunch of different cultures. So I don't know if that, I don't know how that helps in what that says about U.S. versus overseas, but that's just an observation.
Gotcha. Lee, anything you want to add to that?
Possibly. I was processing that question initially because, I mean, it is the case where there's a lower drinking age. That doesn't mean the kids are more responsible around alcohol. And so that's what I was trying to process is, what is the difference? Is there one? What impact do these laws and cultural views of substances have? I think also of Iceland, for example, who did, because they're a smaller country, smaller population can do this, did this national prevention effort that went into curfews, laws around alcohol and other drugs, as well as having structured rec centers and activities for kids to do. And they saw the rates of substance misuse drastically decrease, right? And so, there are beliefs around substances, there are laws and policies that really can change the course or make an impact. But I think just in terms of my experience traveling around, and as Will mentioned, just last week or the week before, where it was an international school. And so there were kids who have been in many different countries. What I really appreciate about that is that while we all have our preconceived ideas about this topic, because the kids have so many different experiences, we're really able to dive in and think critically about some of those, rather than the face of it being, well, the law here is 21, and kind of thinking about how that might be different without the experience of being in other areas where the laws are different, if that makes any sense. And so really looking at, despite the laws, what is really impacting our individual decisions and the potential consequences that we have. And so I don't know if that really answered the question either, but it's just an opportunity for exploration into our beliefs and potentially behaviors around these substances.
Yeah. Different perspectives, different lenses, right? And so that's always provides a richer conversation and provides some perhaps different solutions. So, Lee, drawing from your background in therapy and social work, we mentioned earlier about integrating mental health considerations into substance prevention work with schools. Talk about how you guys do that.
It's a great question. And it looks different in different schools, I'd say. I mean, we always make that effort to upfront with schools, let them know that that we hope this will be an ongoing conversation that is not siloed, that is not just a one and done and let's move on.
Right.
And so we're really looking at how to tie it into SEL or well-being programming. What are some organic avenues? Maybe some systems that already exist. So for example, working with some schools on their substance-specific curriculum within their well-being classes and programming. We also when we are teaching or when we're in the classroom or talking with adults, we are talking about the relationship between mental health or overall well-being and substance use, and how substance use and mental health struggles tend to go hand in hand, and it's sometimes difficult to know which came first
Yeah.
or why one is escalating, or and so that's always a consideration that we like to bring to the table as well.
Awesome. And so, a lot of schools struggle with balancing discipline and support when addressing, student substance use. What frameworks or approaches do you recommend school leaders try to use? I'm going to repeat that question.
Mhm.
So, a lot of schools struggle with balancing discipline and support when addressing student substance use. What frameworks or approaches do you recommend to school leaders trying to navigate this challenge?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm happy, Lee, if you want to jump
Go
in.
ahead. Okay.
Okay, you thinking too?
Yes.
This may be a little bit of some things we mentioned earlier. I do think it takes getting together to have the conversation and
Hmm.
analysis of what's working and not. And in the best case scenarios, you have some data
Uh-huh.
to look at to best understand like what's working and what's not. What are the way upstream factors that we're seeing influence student well-being and the decisions that they're making. More and more, we know this, that substance misuse is, and substance use in general, it is a health issue. And so the more a school can kind of come from that
Hmm.
perspective, and whether they do drug testing, whether it's mandatory, opt-in, random, or no drug testing at all, approaching policies through the lens of health and
Yep.
the healthy outcomes we want for our kids now and today, as well as in the future, seems to be a really good place to anchor your policies. That sort of helps mediate that non-discipline versus discipline. So I think we're keeping in mind the lens of health is really important.
Hmm.
Um, and then again, coming up with those clear policies.
Yep.
I think with the policies, they tend to be more black and white, and
Hmm.
they should be. That
Yep.
doesn't mean they're not hard to come up with and to stick to
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
communicate. So there's some effort that takes to getting it out there, and you should repeat it regularly. You should repeat those policies regularly, and redundancy would be your best friend. So it's fine if the kids
Yep.
are rolling their eyes or whatever, or the
Yep.
community, because that means they know it. With the non-disciplinary, I would say, Lee, I wonder I think you would agree that it's a little messier because you are opening up to, at what point is this beyond something we can handle
Mm.
as a school if there's repeated kind of infractions or a kid is continuing to struggle. So you really have to put the thought and energy and have this sort of staffing or partnerships outside to be able to assess, is this child struggling
Hmm.
more than we are able to help them? And then how does that then work with our policy of this is not the best place for them to be right now?
Right.
So all of I think that the thing I would say about that is all of that needs to be just handled with care, and we know
Yeah.
how hard that is. And yet, ultimately, like with that consistency and clarity, and then ultimately communicating back to the kids in the community, like, hey, just wanted to let you know you're not always going to hear that this worked. Or that this is how this person is being invited back to school next year. So
Right.
as much as you can to kind of tell the story all the way through,
Hmm.
and stay authentic to those. Like, don't just say you're coming from a health. A health. It's all about the health. Like, do your best to honor that we really do care about your health and well-being. And yes, there are also policies to protect the whole community. So uh, that's my philosophical take. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
No, I think so. Anything you want to add, Lee?
I was struggling to come up with a succinct, concrete answer because every time I think I have one, I can think of examples where it didn't work out the way that a school had hoped or where there was some complication. And I think that's just the nature of,
Sure.
as we've discussed, working with policies and humans. And
Yep.
so what I would say, and where it seems people get tied up the most, is in those non-disciplinary avenues, or when there is a clear discipline policy and a student breaks that, but they have a story of why they broke that, and we all have compassion and empathy and want to help, and so now we're skirting the clearly
Yeah.
written policy, and that becomes really complicated. And so it does take a lot of work to build those supportive measures that
Hmm.
work in harmony with the discipline system. And
Yep.
I would also say getting parents involved and on board as
Yeah,
well is a
absolutely.
huge piece of it. And so, that's an area where we've seen a lot of schools struggle, is getting
Hmm.
that parent engagement in this type of conversation. I also see some conflict in terms of modeling and messaging when schools have events on campus that have alcohol, that they serve alcohol for adults. And we've seen
Yeah.
with that, of saying this conflicts with everything we're saying, but we're hesitant to stop serving alcohol because that's a whole issue in itself when it's not available to the adults. And so I think there's a lot of wrestling among the adults, and then kind
Yeah.
of coming back together with what is really best for our students.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to wrestle, and I also feel like sometimes schools feel like they have the policy and they have to there's no like flexibility in changing the policy, or they, once you kind of go down this path and that's it. Like you can't say, "Oh, well maybe we should, pivot a little bit." I think sometimes schools are afraid to do that, and I think the more they wrestle and have these conversations, sometimes you feel like, "Oh, maybe we need to kind of reword this a little bit. Maybe we need to kind of think about some alternatives." And I don't know who gives schools a flexibility, or say the kind of go ahead, like, approval to go ahead and do that. It seems like they're, a little afraid to do that. And so, encouraging schools to say, hey, if you don't love your policy, you don't feel like it's quite speaking to kind of your mission or what's happening in the school, because schools change, right? Students change. And so sometimes we have to adopt our policies to reflect that. So you guys have been in this kind of business, the game, since the early 2000s. How's the landscape of substance abuse prevention in schools changed since you guys began this work? And are there challenges today that are different than they were all those years ago?
Mm.
It's a good question. So I grew up in the DARE era,
Yes. Yep.
public school system with DARE, and things have changed since then. I believe even DARE has changed, right? But our understanding as a society or as a country has changed somewhat, although I think it's slow to
Hmm.
evolve. But we see more organizations and initiatives that revolve around education and opening the conversation and providing supports for young people, specifically around substance misuse and
Hmm.
addiction for young people. Whereas, that was a harder conversation to have when it was more punitive and hidden. Although in some ways, change takes a long time. So I
It
think
does.
I don't know
At
how
least
far.
lasting change, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, overall, we can look nationally at teen substance use. So, for example, alcohol use has gone down over the past few decades.
Mm,
Nicotine use had gone down drastically until the advent of vapes and things like that. And so I think that the public health measures of awareness and the laws that were created have been having an impact. I would like to see more continued work around destigmatizing, you know, just the topic in general, because
mm,
it is something that people are afraid to talk about, or that we have, biases and perceptions about still.
sure. Any other thoughts from you, Will?
I think that's good for me right
Okay,
now. Did you
fair
want us to
enough.
speak to anything else about that?
No, no, just curious if you had any additional thoughts.
Oh, I do, I'm sure, but I'm being disciplined.
What role do you see technology playing, both as a risk factor and as a potential solution in substance use prevention for today's digitally connected students?
I
Well, I'd
heard a
love for
really
you.
good quote from someone in education who was, I think, speaking from his expertise, saying like, don't worry about your students or your child accessing the internet or technology. Worry about technology and the internet accessing them. And I thought that was really thoughtful and profound in a lot of ways. And I think just the access that um, the internet, social media, gambling, getting substances online, all of the different sort of temptations and the speed with which you can kind of satisfy um, cravings and then start a cycle of that on it, maybe on a small level, with something like just picking up your phone. But these are things that are new to the human brain. And so I think it's really tough to I can't imagine trying to regulate myself if I were a child today. So I think those are some of the risk factors. Broadly speaking, is just the ease of access that technology provides for substances and just anything that taps into sort of the reward system, the primitive reward system, which unfortunately we know, whether it's video games or tobacco industry or the cannabis industry or the alcohol industry, they know exactly how to do that. And so they have a real leg up in all of that. So I think that's a risk factor. I mean, this is a bit selfish for us, but I mean, we are looking at, in terms of how it can be a protective factor, um, we're just looking at ways we can use technology to normalize healthy behaviors. So it's pretty easy to pick up your phone and see anything that might be saying, "Oh, nicotine's a great, performance enhancing substance," which, by the way, is not. We don't totally we don't agree with that. Or there's my friends partying online, and wow, I'm really missing out because I'm at a different school or something like that. But there are a lot of kids, as Lee pointed out. I mean, if you look at, I think 76 to 85% or something like that of 10th graders in the U.S. didn't use a substance in the last month. So there's a lot of health out there, and we don't champion that enough. I don't think we need to do it like we're not doing drugs, but more of just like, I'm a thoughtful kid. I'm making, I wanna do well. I'm working really hard. So I think that's one way that technology can kind of leverage technology to normalize healthy choices. And then for us, in terms of gathering student feedback, we are looking at integrating some quantitative measures in addition to our qualitative measures into sort of a digital system that allows kids just to speak into their phone or to take the survey online, same with faculty or anybody else, so that kind of integrates with our qualitative feedback. So I think that for any organization, data collection, and doing that the right way obviously is another big opportunity for public health and certainly for prevention in schools.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much for your answer. Now, if school leaders listening to this podcast want to strengthen their substance prevention efforts, what steps would you recommend they take first with their communities?
I would give someone a go ahead, Lee. It looks like you're teed up.
Go for it.
Well, I would give somebody a call. Give another school a call or an organization. We're always available to chat. But I mean, there's lots of great organizations out there to have to talk about like what's working well for another school if that's who you reach out to. Or we love to have just exploratory phone calls with schools to understand where they are. So I think just starting that conversation somehow, whether you're a dean or a counselor or some other type of administrator. So that's kind of, I don't know, maybe that's not exactly what you were looking for, but that's just get the conversation started. I think in doing so in the spirit of let's do this collaboratively. And again, kind of coming from that health perspective, like we're not doing this because I think it's always important to be like, maybe there's an issue. Maybe there's really permissive use of alcohol among, certain parts of the community, or vaping has increased in bathrooms. Maybe you have something like that going on, but ultimately I think we're coming from a place of strength. And so prevention is about maintaining that. And so like thinking collaboratively, picking up the phone, doing some exploration, and knowing that you're not necessarily putting out fire so much as you are trying to scoop up the whole well-being approach and say we should make sure that our prevention wing of that is where we want it to be.
Awesome. As we wrap up, what does your process look like when you go to school campuses?
Yeah, Lee, you do that.
Sure. That really depends on exactly what we're doing. If we are just starting with a school and doing a long-term kind of partnership to really evaluate prevention and well-being efforts, or a school who is thinking we need to do something different. We might start with a sound boards assessment where we come in for 2 or 3 days and we meet with small groups of students and teachers and parents and interview them to get their perceptions or input on the risks and protections in the community on the well-being or prevention programming. And so we might just be hopping from room to room, or people are coming to us, and just constant flow of asking questions. And then the follow-up from that would be a comprehensive report that outlines those risks and protections and goes into some detail about some potential next steps as well as longer-term recommendations. Oftentimes, if a school does that, they will also at some point do education, which we may provide. And so that could be 1, 2, 3, 4 of us going to a campus for 1 to 4 days, let's say, and meeting in a classroom size or classroom setting with students, doing assemblies, doing some workshops for adults as well. And we don't want that to be the only time that we interact with that school. If we're doing education, we want that to be still an ongoing conversation where we're available throughout the year for any troubleshooting or guidance. We do a lot of consultations on or off campus with counselors and admin to talk about policy, curriculum, things like that.
I would just summarize just briefly to the things that stand out with what you said, Lee, is we'd listen to a school, and that's sort of the first thing, and we do all of it in the spirit of partnership. And part of that partnership is just trying to establish a feedback loop where, like Lee said, regardless, maybe we go in for a few days and do some education, or it's more of a comprehensive multi-year approach, is just we're there for you, we're troubleshooting with you, we're collaborating with you. So I think listening and partnership and constant sort of feedback to support and support.
Wonderful. Will and Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. I certainly learned a lot, especially about nicotine and some of the other things that are on the horizon that I just had not really heard about up until now. And so thank you for bringing those things to the forefront for us. As we close today, I want to remind people that registration is now open for the Dean's Roundtable Annual Conference. The conference will be held June 23rd through 26th on the campus of the New England Innovation Academy. We have an exciting lineup of speakers, including Soundcheck Prevention Network, who will be joining us there. We hope to see you then. As always, thank you for spending time with us on the Dean's Roundtable podcast. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Bridget.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Dean's Roundtable podcast series. For those of you leading the charge in student life, if you're ready to rediscover what made you fall in love with this work in the first place, join us at the Dean's Roundtable Annual Conference. During these 4 transformative days, you'll connect with fellow deans, share game-changing ideas, and walk away with practical strategies you can use right now. Head to deansroundtable.org to learn more, and if you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Will Strawn and Lee Bergeron. Produced and edited by Andrick Sigmund, and music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And as always, thanks again for listening.